Star Trek. Voyager proved how to reform DS9's enemies. Star Trek. Deep Space Nine dared to challenge the franchise's idealism by introducing more morally gray characters, especially through its enemies. The Maquis, the Cardassians, the Borg, and even the Ferengi evolved in ways no previous Trek series had explored. But while DS9 introduced many of these adversaries with nuance, it was Star Trek, Voyager, often dismissed as a lost-in-the-Delta Quadrant survival tale that quietly excelled in something much harder, showing how those enemies could be reformed. Voyager didn't just confront hostile forces, it absorbed them, tested them, and, crucially, gave them a second chance. Whether it was giving a rogue Maquis a purpose, a former drone a soul, or a hologram sentience, Voyager took DS9's hardened edges and softened them without losing the bite. In doing so, Voyager became a story about healing and transformation, succeeding in redeeming some of the most feared or misunderstood villains the Star Trek universe had ever known. The Maquis. From renegades to Starfleet officers, the Maquis were a product of DS9's political complexity. Created in the wake of the Federation-Cardassian peace treaty, the Maquis were Federation colonists who refused to abandon their homes, choosing rebellion over relocation. DS9 portrayed them as tragic but dangerous, a thorn in both Starfleet's and Cardassia's side. They were ideologically committed and often ruthless, making them hard to redeem within DS9's geopolitical framework. Then came Voyager. In the very first episode, Caretaker, Captain Janeway is forced to merge her Starfleet crew with a Maquis ship after both are stranded in the Delta Quadrant. This was a brilliant setup for long-term conflict, but more impressively, it became a laboratory for transformation. Chakotay, the former Maquis commander, became Janeway's trusted first officer. His quiet leadership and spiritual strength embodied the very Starfleet values he once opposed. B'Elanna Torres, a half-Klingon Maquis engineer with a temper and an authority problem, evolved into Voyager's chief engineer and one of the most emotionally resonant characters in the series. The friction between Starfleet and Maquis identities wasn't ignored. Episodes like Learning Curve and Worst Case Scenario tackled it head-on. But over time, the divisions melted into mutual respect and shared purpose. What Voyager proved is that even ideological insurgents, when cut off from the system they were rebelling against, can find new meaning, especially when treated not as criminals but as potential allies. Where DS9 painted the Maquis in shades of political urgency, Voyager reimagined them as people caught between two worlds, people who could be redeemed. The Borg, turning assimilation into individuality. DS9 hinted at the threat of the Borg, but Voyager wrestled with them directly. While the next generation had turned the Borg into the ultimate inhuman threat, machines that consumed individuality, Voyager turned that terror inside out by asking the question, what if you could undo assimilation? That question was answered through the unforgettable 7 of 9. Introduced in Season 4 Scorpion, Part 2, 7 was a former human assimilated as a child. Her initial appearance as a cold, logical drone gave way to one of the most compelling character arcs in Star Trek history. Seven's journey wasn't just about shedding her cybernetic implants. It was about reclaiming autonomy, rediscovering emotion, and learning what it meant to be human. In DS9, the Borg were mostly spoken of in apocalyptic terms. Their reputation was that of unstoppable annihilation. Voyager dared to say, they can change. Not easily. Not quickly. But change was possible. With 7, we saw the horrifying cost of assimilation, but also the strength it took to break free from it. Crucially, Voyager didn't stop at 7. Episodes like Collective and Survival Instinct showed how multiple X-drones dealt with post-assimilation trauma. Some wanted their individuality back. Others couldn't cope without the collective. These shades of gray enriched the mythos of the Borg far more than any battle scene could. In DS9, the Borg were the perfect metaphor for faceless evil. In Voyager, it became a mirror for identity loss, recovery, and the hope of renewal. Cardassians and moral accountability, the legacy of Seska. Cardassians in DS9 were a tangled mix of imperialism, regret, and paranoia. Characters like Gul Dukat and Garak were fascinating precisely because they embodied contradictions. DS9 explored Cardassian guilt, ambition, and downfall with Shakespearean flair. Voyager didn't have room for complex Cardassian politics in the Delta Quadrant, but it did feature one unforgettable Cardassian in disguise, Seska. A Bajoran-posing Cardassian spy who infiltrated the Maquis, Seska was more than a twist villain. Her betrayal of Chakotay and defection to the Kazan were devastating precisely because they felt personal. Seska wasn't interested in Federation ideals or even Cardassian glory, she wanted control. But what Voyager did with Seska was interesting. It used her as a foil to show how not everyone could be redeemed. While other former Maquis like B'Elanna found purpose, Seska doubled down on manipulation and violence. Her arc suggested that redemption is a choice, not an inevitability. She helped define what Voyager's version of enemy meant, someone who could reform but wouldn't. In contrast to DS9, which often blurred the line between villain and anti-hero, Voyager gave us enemies who had a clear fork in the road and made them choose. Seska's choice to embrace duplicity highlighted the courage it took for others to grow beyond their past. The Hirogen and the evolution of cultural violence. DS9's villains were often grounded in politics or ideology. But Voyager introduced new enemies whose danger came from deeply embedded cultural traits. The Hirogen, an alien species obsessed with hunting, fit this model. Initially introduced as merciless killers, they had no use for diplomacy or mercy. In episodes like The Killing Game, the Hirogen enslaved the Voyager crew in brutal holodeck simulations. They were every bit as menacing as the Jem'Hadar, but without a chain of command to exploit. And yet, by the end of The Killing Game, Captain Janeway brokered an uneasy truce not through firepower, but through the offer of technology that could evolve their society. She gave them holodeck tech so they could hunt without killing. It was a bold move that embodied the Starfleet principle of non-interference tempered by compassion. Voyager suggested that even the most violent cultures can shift if shown an alternative. This was a lesson DS9 seldom had the chance to explore, as war consumed more and more of its narrative. In DS9, victory often meant military defeat of the enemy. In Voyager, it meant offering a path forward. The Doctor, rewriting what enemy even means. One of Voyager's most daring reforms wasn't even of an external enemy, it was of a concept: artificial intelligence. DS9 explored holograms like Vic Fontaine as charming oddities, but Voyager took it further with the emergency medical hologram. Initially a tool, the Doctor evolved into a person. He developed hobbies, desires, ethics, and even a name which he never quite settled on. His journey paralleled the broader theme of redemption, not from evil, but from objectification. The Doctor wasn't a villain in the traditional sense, but he began as something Starfleet officers ignored or abused. Over time, he earned not just their respect but their friendship. This reform wasn't just about him. It was about the crew, especially Janeway, learning to see sentience in the most